My name is Michael Taylor. I'm 42 years old, a long-haul truck driver. The job's tough and relentless, but it pays the bills, and it provides for my family. I've got a wife, Laura, and 2 kids who have grown up with me being away for days, sometimes weeks at a time. I told myself it was just part of the job, the fatigue, the stress, the isolation. But what do you do when you start feeling like something's off? When your body starts sending signals that you're not invincible, no matter how many miles you've driven, no matter how many hours you've worked. It happened during a night shift, just like any other. I was on the road, the hum of the engine and the darkness stretching for miles ahead. The world outside my truck felt distant, far removed from my reality. The windows were closed, and the sound of tires humming on the highway became a monotonous rhythm, almost soothing. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy from fatigue, but nothing new, nothing unusual. Just another night. But then, a sharp pain cut through my chest. At first, I thought it was just a cramp, something that would pass. I gritted my teeth, focused on the road, and tried to push through it. My hands gripped the wheel tighter as the discomfort lingered, sharp and insistent. The pain began creeping up my arm, and I could feel my breath getting shallow. The truck seemed to close in around me, every mile feeling longer than the last. I told myself it was nothing, just stress. Maybe I'd slept wrong or hadn't eaten enough. But the pain kept coming. It wasn't like anything I'd ever felt before. My head started spinning, and my chest felt tight, so tight, like I was suffocating. It was a deep, burning sensation that I couldn't shake. I thought, maybe, if I kept driving, it would go away. After all, I had done this 100 times before. I knew exhaustion, I knew stress, and I knew how to push through it. I reached for the radio, trying to distract myself, but my fingers couldn't quite grasp the dial. My vision blurred, and my heartbeat seemed to pound in my ears, deafening and relentless. The truck's engine roared beneath me, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion. Every second stretched on longer than the last. I realized, then, that I wasn't going to make it. Not like this. Pulling over to the shoulder of the highway was the hardest decision I've ever made. The gravel crunched under my tires as I drifted to a stop, the truck's engine still rumbling. I could feel the sweat pouring down my face. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone. I dialed 911 with shaky fingers, trying to calm my breathing enough to speak. "I think I'm having a heart attack," I said, my voice barely audible. I was too scared to cry out, too scared to show how badly I was shaking. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, to remain calm. But I couldn't. I felt the world spinning around me, my mind fogging over as panic set in. The last thing I remember before I lost consciousness was the sound of sirens. The blaring noise grew louder as I felt myself slipping away. My heart, my body, everything felt like it was shutting down. And then, nothing. When I woke up, everything felt off. I was lying in a hospital bed, the faint beeping of machines filling the silence. My chest ached, and my throat felt dry. My body felt alien, foreign to me in a way that made it hard to breathe. I glanced around, confused and disoriented, trying to piece together what had happened. A nurse came into view, her face concerned but professional. "Mr. Taylor," she said, her voice soft. "You're in the hospital. You had a heart attack." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a heart attack. A heart attack. It didn't feel real. I thought I was invincible, but there I was, fighting for breath, hooked up to machines that kept me alive. The nurse went on to explain that I had come close to death, that my heart had nearly stopped. I could have died on the side of that road, miles away from home, from the people I loved. I felt numb. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was like everything had frozen. I had ignored the signs for so long that I couldn't even bring myself to feel anything. The exhaustion, the pain, it all seemed irrelevant now. All that mattered was that I had survived. But what had I survived for? The next few days in the hospital were a blur. The doctors worked to stabilize me, running tests, prescribing medications, and telling me that I needed to change my life. I needed to slow down. I couldn't shake the nagging thought that, in all the years I had spent working, in all the sacrifices I had made, I had forgotten one simple truth: I had been putting my job, my obligations, above everything else. My health. My family. Myself. For the first time in a long time, I wondered if I had been chasing the wrong things. The hospital room felt cold, sterile, as I lay there, trying to process what had just happened. I had nearly died, and yet there was no overwhelming sense of fear or anger. Just numbness. The shock of it all made me feel disconnected from the reality that awaited me outside the sterile walls. I thought about Laura, my wife, and the kids. What would this mean for them? Would my heart attack change everything? Or would I simply return to the same life, only this time, with a ticking clock hanging over my head? When I woke up the following morning, my phone was buzzing with missed calls and messages. I didn't have the energy to go through them. The only one that caught my attention was from Laura. A simple message, short, direct, almost matter of fact: "I deserve this after everything I've done for you." I stared at the screen, trying to process the words. Deserve this? What was she talking about? My mind felt foggy, but there was something about the message that didn't sit right with me. I scrolled down to check my bank account, the one we'd always shared, and my stomach dropped. The balance was almost empty. A few $100s left where there used to be thousands. Laura had taken it all. I should have been angry, should have felt a wave of betrayal, but I didn't. Instead, I just felt exhausted. It was the kind of exhaustion you feel after too much running, when your legs are numb, and you can't go any further, but you don't have the strength to stop either. I didn't reply to her message at first. I didn't know what to say. But then, my fingers moved on their own. I typed a response, a single thumbs up emoji, and hit send. There was no satisfaction in it, no relief. Just a deep, empty feeling in my chest that echoed the silence between us. After a few more days in the hospital, I was discharged. The doctors had done their part. I was physically stable, though they told me I had to make major changes in my life. The hardest part, though, was knowing that I couldn't go back to the life I had. Not just because of the heart attack, but because of everything else. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I didn't know how to face Laura after everything that had happened. How could I go back to a house where she had taken everything from me, emotionally and financially, without a second thought? I called my brother, Daniel. We hadn't spoken much in the past few months, but now, in the aftermath of the crisis, I needed someone. "Hey, man, can I crash at your place for a while?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Of course. Come over whenever you're ready." I didn't want to admit it, but it felt like I was running away. I was leaving the woman I had spent over a decade of my life with, but I couldn't stay. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When I arrived at Daniel's house, it felt like the first moment of peace I'd had in weeks. He welcomed me with open arms, but I could tell he was concerned. We didn't talk much at first. I was too lost in my own head, too deep in the whirlpool of thoughts and doubts swirling around me. As the days passed, I began to reflect. I thought about everything I had sacrificed for this life. The long hours, the nights spent on the road, the calls I missed, the weekends I never had with my family. I thought about Laura. About how she'd stopped being interested in me. How she'd stopped caring about our life together, about our kids. She had become someone else, someone I didn't know. I'd caught glimpses of it over the years, the long phone calls, the secrecy, the nights she stayed out late, the excuses. But I never questioned her. I never wanted to see the truth, even when it was right in front of me. I had told myself she was just stressed, just busy. Maybe I thought I could fix it by working harder, by being more present, but I never considered that maybe she had already checked out. That maybe she had already moved on. The pain in my chest wasn't just physical, it was the slow burn of realization that I had been living in a lie. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the affairs or the empty promises. It was the fact that I had been so consumed by the job, by the idea of providing, that I had let it all slip away. My family. My health. My dignity. I needed answers. I needed to know what had happened to us, to me, to everything I thought I had. The days after I left the hospital and Daniel's house felt like walking through a fog. I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going, but I knew one thing: I couldn't go back to the life I'd been living. I had to start over, even if I didn't fully understand what that meant yet. For the first time in years, I wasn't just drifting through my days on autopilot. I had to face the consequences of my actions, of the years I had spent ignoring the cracks in my life, hoping they would heal on their own. I spent the first week just trying to breathe. I couldn't think about Laura, not yet. I couldn't think about the kids or what was going to happen next. The shock of everything had left me drained, empty. I needed a moment to gather myself before I could even begin to process the situation. But then, I remembered something I should have done a long time ago: look at the finances. I should have kept a closer eye on everything, but I had trusted Laura to handle it all. I didn't want to believe she could betray me in that way, but deep down, I knew. The signs had been there all along. I spent the next few days going through bank statements, digging into accounts, trying to make sense of what had happened while I was recovering. It was like pulling back layers of a rotting foundation, and what I found wasn't just unsettling, it was shocking. Large amounts of money had been transferred from our joint accounts to ones I had no knowledge of. There were transactions I couldn't explain. I called the bank and spent hours on the phone, asking for details, trying to piece together the puzzle. Every answer I received only confirmed what I had feared: Laura had been hiding things. Not just money, secrets, plans, a life I hadn't been a part of for who knows how long. But it wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even about the affair, though that stung more than anything. It was about the fact that she had taken control of everything. She had taken the reins of our lives, and I had let her. I had worked, provided, and kept my head down, thinking everything would be fine. But I had ignored the cracks, thinking they were just a part of life. I reached out to a lawyer to understand my options. I wasn't sure what I wanted yet, but I knew I had to protect myself. The house, the assets, my future. I couldn't just let it all slip away. I couldn't let her destroy everything we had built. I was running on empty, emotionally, physically, mentally, but I had to keep moving. I had to rebuild. One evening, a message came through from a neighbor. I had never paid much attention to them, but this message was different. It was short, simple, and to the point: Laura's been seeing someone else. I thought you should know. The weight of those words hit me like a ton of bricks. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. This was it. The confirmation. Laura had moved on while I was barely holding myself together. All the years of sacrifice, all the hours I spent away from home, all the work I did to give her a better life, nothing mattered. She had already left me behind. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the phone, trying to decide what to do next. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. I had to take control of my life again. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to follow her lead. I didn't have to live in the shadow of her choices. I could make my own decisions. I contacted the lawyer again, and this time, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to let her take everything. I wasn't going to let her have the life we had built together. I was going to fight. I didn't know how, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to face what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done being passive. Done being the guy who let things happen to him. I had already lost so much, but I wasn't going to lose myself. The more I dug into the mess that was my life, the clearer it became: I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act, and I had to act fast. The legal battles loomed ahead, and as much as I had hoped for a peaceful resolution, it became clear that I was headed for a full-blown confrontation with Laura. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. The first step was securing my assets. After all the years of ignoring the financial side of things, I suddenly found myself buried in paperwork, bank statements, tax forms, old contracts, and credit card receipts. I felt like I was drowning in the details, but I had no choice. I needed to protect what was mine. I consulted with a lawyer I found through a recommendation from an old friend. His name was Peter, and he was the type of lawyer who didn't sugarcoat things. He told me straight away that Laura had the upper hand in terms of assets, but with the evidence I was gathering, we had a solid chance. The fact that Laura had emptied our joint accounts and hidden funds in secret accounts worked in my favor. The more Peter looked over everything, the more he confirmed what I already knew: Laura had planned this for a long time. And she had crossed a line that now had legal consequences. While I worked through the legal details, I kept thinking about the last few years. About how I had let her make decisions without consulting me, how I had just accepted the distance between us without ever questioning it. I had never thought to ask the tough questions: why was she spending so much time away from home? Why were there so many private conversations that I wasn't a part of? I should have seen the warning signs. But even then, when I had the proof in my hands, I still wasn't angry. I wasn't burning with rage the way I thought I would be. It wasn't just resignation either. It was a strange calm, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the storm roll in but not feeling the need to fight it anymore. The storm was coming, and there was no way to stop it, but I had a plan. I was going to be ready. One night, after several days of meetings and calls with the lawyer, I reached out to John, an old friend who worked in law enforcement. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I knew he was the kind of guy who could help me get the final piece of the puzzle. I told him everything. About the financial transactions, about the affair, about everything that had happened. I needed confirmation, something concrete I could use in court. A few days later, John called me back. He had done some digging of his own, and it turned out that Laura's affair wasn't just a casual fling. The guy she had been seeing had a reputation, and it wasn't a good one. John confirmed that the man was involved in some shady business deals, and there were rumors that he had been using Laura for information. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had married, the woman I had spent half my life with, had been so far gone that she was tangled up in things I couldn't even understand. This information gave me leverage. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even just about the affair. It was about Laura's betrayal on every level. The fact that she had crossed so many lines, hurt so many people, all while keeping up the facade of a perfect life, it made me sick. Armed with this new information, I moved forward. I contacted the court, filed the necessary papers, and had them served. The legal battle was about to begin, and I knew Laura wasn't going to take this lying down. She had hired a top-tier lawyer, someone who didn't lose cases. I knew I had to be prepared. I was no longer the man who let things happen to him. I was going to take control of the narrative, piece by piece, and make sure that my future, and the future of my children, was protected. The next step was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I had already made up my mind that I would walk into that courtroom with everything I had. Laura would not get away with this. She would face the consequences of her actions, and I would make sure of it. There was no going back now. The days leading up to my return home were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and strategy. I had been living with the quiet hum of a new purpose, a purpose born of survival, of reclaiming what was mine. But now, the time had come to face Laura, to step back into the life I once had, and to see the destruction she had left in her wake. The moment I walked through the door, I knew something was different. The house, once filled with the sounds of my kids and the warmth of family life, now felt empty. There were things out of place, new items scattered across the rooms, things that didn't belong to me. The old photos, the small mementos we had collected over the years, were nowhere to be found. I stood in the living room for a moment, taking it all in, before moving through the house. The sense of loss hit me hard. It wasn't just the physical changes, it was the realization that Laura had already begun to disconnect. She had already started the process of moving on, and I hadn't even been part of that decision. I had spent so many years focused on my work, thinking I was doing the right thing, that I had failed to notice her slipping away. The truth was staring me in the face. Laura had already packed a few of her things, leaving behind what she didn't care to take with her. It was as if she had expected me to return, but she was already gone. Not physically, perhaps, but emotionally. She had checked out long ago, and now I was just another casualty of her betrayal. I moved through the house methodically, gathering the things I needed. Important documents, the things that had meaning to me, things that she had no right to take from me. I grabbed the old family photo from the mantel, the one we used to keep in a frame near the door. It was one of the few things left untouched, a moment frozen in time when we were still a family. When we were happy. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was Laura. She walked into the room, her face pale but composed. She looked at me, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition, a flicker of something familiar. But it quickly faded as she processed the reality of what was happening. "I thought you would never come back," she said, her voice quieter than I expected. There was no anger, no accusation, just the flatness of a person who had already moved on from the situation. "I didn't think I would either," I said. The words came out sharper than I expected, but they were true. I didn't want to return to this life. I didn't want to face her. But I had to. I took what I needed, documents, money, a few of my personal belongings, and walked out of the house. There was nothing left for me there. Not anymore. I returned to Daniel's house, the place where I had started to rebuild myself. As I walked into his front door, the weight of what had just happened started to settle in. Laura was gone, the house was gone, but in many ways, I felt lighter. I didn't have to carry the burden of pretending anymore. The lie I had been living had crumbled, and in its place was something new, a chance to rebuild, to start fresh. But even as I began to process everything, there was still a part of me that longed for the family I had lost. I had spent so many years chasing something that wasn't real. I had thought I was doing the right thing by providing for my family, by sacrificing everything for them. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Laura had moved on, and in many ways, so had I. But I still couldn't shake the thought that something had been broken beyond repair. The next few weeks were a blur. The legal battles began, and as expected, Laura fought back. Her lawyer was ruthless, using every tactic they could to gain an advantage. But the evidence I had gathered, her financial deceit, the affair, the lies, was enough to give me the upper hand. Slowly, piece by piece, the court proceedings played out in my favor. And when it was over, when the final ruling came down, I knew the battle was won. Laura lost the house. She lost the life we had built together. And while that might have been what I had wanted, I couldn't help but feel a strange emptiness. The destruction wasn't just about the assets or the house, it was about everything we had lost. The family. The trust. The years that would never come back. But in the midst of all that destruction, I had found something new. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was freedom. The weight that had been crushing me for so long had been lifted, and I was free to rebuild my life, to rebuild myself. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a future again.